Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, Kitty Pryde is releasing today. She should be out by the time this video drops. And I wanted to go over just some thoughts about the card and some day one decks to try her out if she's a card you think you want to pick up. So what does Kitty Pryde do? She is a 1 cost, 0 power with the text, "You can return this to your hand to gain +2 power." Now, something important to note about this card, she is only gaining that +2 power if you are using her effect to return herself to your hand. So if you bounce it in another way via a location or with Beast or with Falcon, she will go back to your hand, but you aren't going to be getting that +2 power unless you're actually using her effect. Another neat thing about this card is you are actually able to bounce it to your hand and replay it in the same turn. So you can play it on turn 1, then on turn 2, you can bounce it to your hand and replay it down on the same turn. Now this is a little strange with how normally you can undo your actions in a game of Marvel Snap. So if you actually want to undo what you've done that turn, instead of pulling it back to your hand to trigger her effect, you have to hit the little energy button and click undo turn. Little thing, but kind of important to note if you want to change up your play with Kitty. But I think this is a really neat card. It is the last card of the season, and I think it's the one people have been most excited for overall with this season's release. So I'm pretty pumped for this one. We've got some decks for it. Overall, I do think out of the 3 that have released this season, Kitty Pryde is the one with the most potential, and we're going to go over the decks for her here. Is she worth your 6k tokens? Personally, I would probably wait for her to be out and see people play with her for a day or two rather than jump the gun. I'm going to jump the gun because it's part of the job as a content creator, but I definitely think this is something where you probably want to wait and see just how good it is. But I think she is by far the card with the most potential that has dropped this month compared to Master Mold and Negasonic, who are both pretty cool in their own right, but I think Kitty is definitely the most interesting one of the bunch. So starting off here, we have our more budget-friendly lists. These are lists that only use Pool 3 cards to go along with Kitty. I know with the recent update, Pool 3 incomplete players are finally getting more tokens more consistently, so they may actually be able to participate in one of these new card releases as opposed to before when they really weren't getting enough tokens to do that. So if you're in the boat of not having finished Pool 3 yet and don't have access to more of the Pool 4 and Pool 5 cards, these are some pretty decent options. The first one here is a bounce list, so we run a bunch of powerful 1-drops, including Sunspot, Iceman, Korg, Nightcrawler, and Rocket Raccoon, are 2 core bounce cards that we have available in Beast and Falcon. Pretty neat interaction with Beast, where if you bounce Kitty with Beast, it will actually remain as a 0 cost card for the rest of the game. We used that very effectively in a Deadpool shell a little while ago, and I think it's going to be very good with Kitty as well. And then we have some cards that are big payoffs for replaying cards, such as Angela and Bishop, Shang-Chi to help equalize the playing field against some of the decks that are trying to go a bit taller, and Chavez gives us that early game consistency as well as sometimes a decent play on the final turn. Then our next deck here is the Jane Thor Lockjaw build. I think Kitty has a lot of potential for a deck like this, because not only can you throw her away into the Lockjaw lane, but if she happens to pop out of the Lockjaw, it's not that big of a deal because you can just bounce her to your hand and replay her into the Lockjaw lane. So definitely pretty useful for that kind of effect, so we don't get as screwed over by the Lockjaw RNG. We have some cheap early drops to throw into the Lockjaw, such as Wasp, Kitty, and Sunspot. Obviously, Lockjaw himself, the namesake of the deck, where we're chucking our cards to get bigger cards to pop out. Thor puts a Mjolnir in our deck, which will not only boost our board, but will also give us a free thing to throw into the Lockjaw. Jubilee as another way of mana cheating if we don't have access to our Lockjaw. Vision's pretty nice as a pop out of the Lockjaw, as we can just move it to another lane. Jane is sweet because not only does she draw our Wasp, but she draws our Mjolnir. Doom helps us go a bit wider, especially if he pops out of the Lockjaw. Chavez will always remain in the deck till the final turn, which is good for our draw consistency and another decent thing to pop out of Lockjaw. And then Magneto and Infinite, as they're just two big final payoff cards that we can cheat in with either Jubilee or Lockjaw. So definitely a very solid version for a pool 3 only deck, and I think Kitty will be a nice addition to it. Moving on to some more decks that Kitty has some use in, we're taking a look at some Zoo shells here. The one at the top is a little bit more budget friendly, as it is all pool 3 cards, Kitty, and then one pool 4 card in Bast, who I believe is going to drop to pool 3 next month. So should be a pool 3 only deck, barring Kitty by then. But I've had a lot of fun and success with Zoo in the past week or so. Been really enjoying playing it, and I think Kitty is going to be a great addition to it. Just a very solid early game shell. Bast helps pump up our numbers quite a lot, and I think Bast has some really good synergy with Kitty as well. Starting off with a 3-power Kitty seems pretty powerful. The rest of the deck, I mean, we just have a bunch of good cheap 1-drops, as Zoo typically does. Angela and Bishop to capitalize on those 1-drops, as well as our Kitty bouncing, Shang-Chi to deal with big threats, and then Khazar and Blue Marvel to help pay off for going wide with all these cheap 1-drops. Then we have a bit more expensive version here in Thanos Zoo. So Thanos Zoo has also been an archetype I've liked quite a lot. Unfortunately, it did get hit a little bit harder with the Quinjet nerf, no longer having free stones, but Beast gives us a way to get free stones once again by bouncing them to our hand and replaying them for their powerful effects. And it also has that great interaction with Kitty that we talked about before, as well as being a nice benefit for the Hood, Angela, and Bishop. So also a really cool shell if you're looking for something to do with Kitty that involves Thanos. This might not be a bad direction to go. Then we have some upgrades to our first 2 decks here with some more expensive cards. So these are the upgrades to the Lockjaw deck and the upgrades to the Bounce deck. The Lockjaw deck ends up being the Thanos version that we basically saw a ton of earlier this season before the nerfs, mainly just swapping in Psylocke for the old Quinjet slot to help us ramp out one of our powerful 5-drops or 6-drops a turn early, and then Kitty being very good with the Lockjaw stuff, being able to just toss her in or pull her out seems very effective with this kind of deck. Not too much else to say about this. If you've played this season at all, you probably know what the Thanos Lockjaw deck is capable of, and I think Kitty is going to be pretty neat to try in that when she releases. And then the other upgrade here is to the Bounce deck. So this is the one I've played a lot of. We're basically just putting Kitty in the final slot. I had the Collector in there before, wasn't really a huge fan of him. I think Kitty's going to perform a much better role. We do add Darkhawk to this list, as even though we only have one main way of pumping the Darkhawk with our Korg, the fact that we can also boost it with Bast or get multiple Korg procs or sometimes beneficial locations to help pump it up makes the Darkhawk rather good. And since we have so much cheap early game stuff, we can usually afford to play him on the final turn, as we'll have played out most of the other cards in our hand. Kitty, really good with Bast, really good with these bounce effects, especially Beast, letting us replay her over and over again. The other cards in this deck really do benefit from that as well. Iceman, Korg for that disruption, Hood for more demons. Mysterio has a really nice interaction with Bast, where all the Mysterio copies are 3/3s. So that's 9 power for 2 mana across 3 lanes. That's pretty effective. Mysterio is also good with Bishop, and then Shang-Chi to help deal with big things. So I really love the Bounce deck. It's one of the most fun decks to play in the game. Definitely a bit of a higher learning curve to it, but once you figure it out, it is really fun, and I think Kitty is going to be a great addition to it. And to close it out here, we have one final deck, and this is definitely meme tier, but I think it's a really amusing meme, and this comes from Willow, really renowned Galactus player, great content creator. And they have sworn by this Jane negative list for a while, and it not saying it's going to be the list that wins you the most games, but it's one you're probably going to have the most fun playing. And it's not the most budget list either. I mean, just taking a look at this, we have Galactus and Null and Kitty as pool 5s. We have Null and Darkhawk as pool 4s. So It's not exactly budget and definitely not something you should really be spending your tokens towards. But if you happen to have the Ultra Whale cards for this one, it could be fun to take for a spin. The idea with this one is we are getting down our Mr. Negative and we're flipping all of these cards to 0 cost, and then we're going to draw them with Jane and do some pretty silly things. You get a early Galactus down. You can also do something like you can play an Iron Man flipped into Zola, copying it into 2 other lanes, free morph. I mean, it's a fun idea. I like the idea behind this a lot, and I think Kitty seems like a fun inclusion that's good with some of the other cards in here, especially Angela. Definitely a bit more Omega Whale meme tier, but figured it would be a fun one to include here to close it out. And those are all our decks for day 1 for Kitty Pryde. I'm going to be streaming with her later tonight, probably have some games with her up later tomorrow, but I'm definitely really excited for this card. If you like any of the decks we showcased here and want to try them out, I'll have links in the description where you can easily import them into the game. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.